William Hope reads Frank Abagnale Jr.'s sumptuous Life on the Run.
My adventures. Adventures in crime, of course, but adventures nonetheless.
Recalling his early life, his successful scams.
If people were stupid enough to cash a check without verifying its validity, they deserved to be swindled.
And his encounters with the law.
The knowledge that I would probably always be a fox hunted by hounds was beginning to weigh on my conscience. When the hounds have help, there is no safe place for a fox.
Catch Me If You Can, weekdays at 1:30 and 8:30.
The digital radio station for comedy and drama. BBC Radio 7.
Right then, it's 3 o'clock and I'm Penny Haslam. We've got features and bestsellers now on 7 as Dirk Bogarde recalls working on another of the landmarks in his film career in a moment. And we keep up with the fallout from Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre's open relationship. And as a left-field gesture, we go all natural history and spend a year in the life of ants. All to come over the next hour. So, in our features and bestsellers, more tales from the world of the silver screen, from one of Britain's most famous movie stars, who, during his career, managed to make a successful transition from matinee idol to serious actor. Today, Dirk Bogarde remembers the 1972 production of Death in Venice.
And now, Bogarde on film. Dirk Bogarde reads an extract from his autobiographies about his film career. Episode 6, Visconti and Venice.
It would be refreshing to report that preparations for Death in Venice went ahead smoothly, calmly and confidently. The reverse, alas, is true. We had to fight, cajole, push and batter to get Mr. Mann's classical work even nearer screen. Money, naturally, was the first problem. Visconti's The Damned was a tremendous success in America, the only thing you need to be there. And they offered to back his next venture, on certain conditions. First, I must be replaced by one or other of two British players who, at that time, brought in a great deal more money to the box office, apparently, than I did. This Visconti refused outright. They promptly halved the budget which they'd originally offered. Visconti still refused to yield me up and settled for the half money. Secondly, they insisted, or tried to insist, that Tazio, the boy, should be played by a girl. This, they declared, would be far more acceptable to American audiences. If the story was left as Thomas Mann had written it, it could only mean one thing in that shining new country: a dirty old man chasing a kid's ass. Visconti heard them out in stunned silence. But this is a search for purity and beauty. Surely people will recognize that. They have been reading the book for many years, even in America. The battle went on for almost a week. Finally, reluctantly, suspiciously, they capitulated on both points. Visconti flew back from New York victorious, battered, and set out in an immense fur hat and sealskin boots to search for his Tazio in the northern capitals. He found him on the first day of the search in Stockholm, a slim, pale, blonde boy of 13, Bjorn Anderson, who had been brought to the auditions by an ambitious grandmother and who was, in spite of a strong predilection for black bubble gum and the Beatles, the ideal choice. We were on our way, except for one very minor major matter. 4 weeks before we were due to start work, Robin Fox telephoned from London and very politely suggested that if Visconti really did want to go ahead, mightn't it be a good idea to check the rights? He'd heard from a fellow agent in New York that they belonged to someone else. At first, Visconti absolutely refused to believe the news was correct. But when he'd spoken to New York, the silence which followed was frighteningly eloquent. Visconti rallied swiftly. After a long and bitter altercation on the telephone to America, he had managed to buy the owner out for a vast sum. The rights were now ours, but at such a cost. The already slender budget had further been depleted. Now really savage economies had to be made. I, for one, lost my entire wardrobe, which had been meticulously planned down to the last button and hook eye, and made do with a couple of old second-hand suits and a too small evening jacket. The crowd, so important to the film and all carefully handpicked by Visconti himself, had to be halved, and on it went, one slashing cut after another to try and balance up the shaking budget. But we were all cheerful in spite of the exhausting problems which beset death in Venice daily. The first, I suppose, was the matter of Marla's nose. It fitted perfectly and looked exactly as it should. Visconti was in raptures. "Ah!" he cried, clasping his beautiful hand. "Ah, my Marla!" The only problem was that I was quite unable to move my head or face. Embalmed as I was in 3 hours' work of plastic, wax and glue, the very slightest movement caused the nose to crack immediately round the edges, from which oozed an extremely unbecoming fluid. The groans of anguish which emanated both from Visconti and the unhappy Mauro, my make-up man, were as nothing to my own distress. It was impossible to use the nose, and without it I knew I would have no character. I would be reduced just to my old familiar face, of which I was exceedingly weary. Visconti quite suddenly slammed the window and looked at his watch. "In one affair, you must come downstairs to the big salon. The press are all waiting. Many friends are there to wish us success, and at 2 o'clock we will make the first shot of the picture is necessary for the insurance people. Ciao!" He and Mario left the room and closed the door, and I stared at my crumpled reflection. Ford was fingering through a small box of moustaches which Mario had left behind in his grief. He handed me one at random. I stuck it on. It was bushy, greyish, Kipling. In another box he disentangled a pair of rather bent pince-nez with a thin gold chain dangling. I placed the hat on my head, wrapped a long beige woolen scarf about my neck, took up a walking stick from a bundle of others, and borrowing a walk from my paternal grandfather, heavily back on the heels, no kneecaps, I started emptying myself of myself, thinking pain and loneliness, bewilderment and age, fear and the terror of dying and solitude, willing von Aschenbach himself to come towards me and slip into the vacuum which I was creating for his reception. And he came. He went out into the long corridor, walking heavily, thumping firmly with the stick for confidence. At the top of the staircase he stopped, one shaking hand holding the cool mahogany rail, trying to square the sagging shoulders which emphasized his agonizing shyness. Below, the hall seemed jammed with people he didn't know. Arrogance slid in like a vapour. Carefully, firmly, he started to descend towards them. Head held as high as it would go, legs as firm as they would allow, hand lightly touching the rail for moral support. There was a sudden hush in the crowded room. Faces swiftly turned upwards towards him. Pink discs, frozen. From a long way away, he suddenly heard Visconti's voice break the almost unbearable stillness. "Oh, look! Look, all of you! Look! Here is my Thomas Mann!" One morning, heavy and hot with the sirocco, the sea grey and flat, the heat almost insufferable, I was told that today, towards 4 in the afternoon, when the light would be exactly right, I should have to play the final death scene. In the make-up room, Visconti was quiet, firm, and very gentle. "You are sick now, and old. Remember what man has said. You will have lips as ripe as strawberries. The dye from your hair will run. When you smile to Tazio, your summoner, your poor face will crack, and then you will die. I tell you all this because when you have the makeup on your face, You will not be able to speak. It will be dead as a mask. We only do one take for that reason. It's hard like plaster. Yes, but what is it? The makeup? Oh, it's very good, it's very good. We have tested very much. All will be well. You will see. He left me to Maro, who held in his hand a fat silver tube of a white substance which, when applied, burned like fire, and started to stiffen. It was too late to protest. For 2 hours I sat immobile while the stuff was plastered and smoothed to my wretched face. When he was finished, I looked like a Japanese puppet. I was carried into a car and driven down to the beach, lest the least movement should cause the, by now, iron-hard mask to crack or chip before the cameras turned. 2 strong men carried my inert body across the burning copper sand to the deck chair placed ready for my demise. Someone removed my hat and fixed a small plastic sack of black dye. This was to break with the heat generated under my hat when the moment came, and would run down my painted face. Since I couldn't speak for fear of cracking the scalding mask, when Albino asked me in a deferential whisper, a priest giving the last rites, if I was ready, I drew the figure 5 with one finger on my knee. This he interpreted as 5 minutes, correctly, so that I could prepare. The silence was intense. I could hear the hot wind flipping the little frills of the sheltering umbrellas, and somewhere miles away a child laughed. I felt my heart racing, the blood surging, and raised my hand for the cameras. We had 3 to cover this supreme moment, and I never heard Visconti's accustomed cry of "Azione!" Back in the make-up room, Maro was beside himself with joy, slapping his thighs, hitting the walls with the flat of his hands, and brushing tears of happiness and triumph from his glowing eyes. Everything, as far as he was concerned, had worked. The hair dye had run perfectly, the face had cracked, the strawberry-red lipstick had smeared, my tears had coursed through the wreckage. It had been splendid. Apparently the dyeing bit had been all right too. We finished shooting on the 1st of August in a plum orchard high up a mountain outside Bolzano, precisely at lunchtime. There was no celebration. We were all far too exhausted. Visconti and I shook hands. "When will you know?" I said. "How soon will you see all the work, the first assembly of Death in Venice?" "Ah, you do not know." "But I've already seen nearly all. Nearly all." "Well, I mean, is it all right, Luchino?" He folded his hands carefully before him. "Your work transcends anything that I remotely dreamed of." Suddenly he took my head and kissed me roughly on both cheeks. "Go away," he commanded. With the Cannes Film Festival only a few weeks away, I found myself in a curious situation. From amongst the wealth of films being shown, Death in Venice had been selected as the official Italian entry, and Joseph Losey's The Go-Between as the British one. I was inadvertently in competition with the director who had perhaps had the most effect on my cinema career. And then a long, apologetic letter from Visconti told me that the film, as the official Italian entry, had to be shown in Italian. That is, dubbed. A rule of the festival stated that any player who was dubbed in a film was not eligible to qualify for an award. So, alas, I was out of the running for an award, which angered me far less than the idea of all my careful preparation and German intonation being sung by some Italian tenor. One thing cheered me. Now that I'd been eliminated from the competition, I was on neutral ground as far as Visconti and Losey were concerned about winning the coveted Palme d'Or for Best Film. On the day of our press show, the auditorium was packed. They sat there in absolute silence, until at one specific moment, halfway through, when von Aschenbach makes a silent decision to return from the railway station to his hotel and confront his future no matter what, the entire theatre exploded with a tremendous roar of spontaneous delight, which drowned the soundtrack. I turned to Visconti, much moved by what had happened, for I'd never witnessed such a moment in a cinema before, nor since. "Luchino, I think we've won." But it was Losi who won. Just before noon on the day of the awards, the news leaked out, whereupon Visconti packed all his Louis Vuitton luggage, checked out of his hotel, and went to the airport, where he sat on his suitcases, awaiting the next flight to Rome. Consternation reigned. Officials flew about in harassed flocks and begged him to return. They had a special prize for him, and he must, they implored, be there to accept it. He sat as still as a block of granite, considering this, and then reluctantly agreed, on condition that the prize was awarded at the very end of the evening, after the Palme d'Or.
And that was, of course, the voice of Dirk Bogarde, reading from his own bestseller.